The small girl's body went limp in her mother's arms at 3:47 p.m. on a scorching July afternoon in Camp Como, Texas, 1945. Helene Weber, a former schoolteacher from Hamburg who'd survived capture, transportation across the Atlantic, and 3 months of internment, now faced something far more terrifying than any of it, watching her 7-year-old daughter Lotte collapse from malnutrition while surrounded by what she'd been taught to call abundance. The American nurse who rushed over carried something Helene had mocked relentlessly for weeks, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What happened in the next 5 minutes would shatter everything Helene believed about American food, about pride, and about what it means to be wrong when your child's life hangs in the balance. One moment, Lotte had been playing a quiet game with pebbles in the shade of the recreation building, her movements slow and listless in the oppressive heat. The next moment she was falling, her thin body crumpling like paper. Helene had been sitting with other German women prisoners discussing the latest Red Cross mail when she heard the small sound, not quite a cry, more like air leaving a punctured tire, and turned to see her daughter on the ground, eyes rolling back, skin the color of old newspaper. "Lotte!" The scream tore from Helene's throat as she ran the 20 feet that separated them, dropping to her knees beside the motionless child. Around her, other women prisoners began shouting for help in German and broken English. American guards converged on the scene with practiced efficiency born from months of managing a camp full of desperate people. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett reached them within seconds, medical kit already open. She was a competent woman in her late 20s who'd served as a trauma nurse in field hospitals before being assigned to Camp Como. Her hands moved with practiced certainty as she checked Lotte's pulse, lifted her eyelids, assessed her breathing. "She's alive, but barely conscious," Bennett said quickly, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Severely malnourished. When did she last eat?" "This morning," Helene stammered in English, clutching her daughter's limp hand. "Bread and water. She ate breakfast." "That's not food, Mrs. Weber. That's starvation with extra steps." Bennett's tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge that cut through Helene's panic. The nurse reached into her kit and pulled out something wrapped in waxed paper, a sandwich, simple and unremarkable. She unwrapped it quickly, revealing white bread with a thick layer of brown paste and purple jelly, peanut butter and grape jelly, the very food Helene had been crusading against for 3 months. "I need to get sugar and protein into her immediately," Bennett said, tearing off a small piece of the sandwich. "Mrs. Weber, hold her head steady." "What is that?" Helene asked, though she already knew, though the smell of it, sweet and nutty and distinctly American, made her stomach clench with remembered contempt. "It's peanut butter and jelly. It's what I had in my kit because I eat one every afternoon. And right now, it's the fastest way to get calories into your daughter before her blood sugar drops so low her brain starts shutting down." Bennett's eyes met Helene's, and in them was a challenge that transcended language and nationality. "Unless you'd prefer to maintain your cultural superiority while she dies?" The words hit like a slap. Helene opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself, but Lotte made a small sound, a whimper so faint it was almost inaudible, and nothing else mattered. Pride, principle, everything she'd been teaching the other German women about refusing to eat like poor Americans, all of it evaporated in the face of that tiny sound of suffering. "Do it," Helene whispered. "Please." Bennett placed a small piece of the sandwich against Lotte's pale lips. The child's mouth opened reflexively, some survival instinct deeper than consciousness recognizing food. Bennett worked carefully, feeding her tiny portions, letting her swallow slowly. Seconds stretched into minutes. The crowd of German women and American guards watched in tense silence. Then, slowly, color began returning to Lotte's cheeks. Her eyelids fluttered. She swallowed more purposefully, and her small hand reached weakly toward the sandwich, as if recognizing salvation. "That's it, sweetheart," Bennett murmured, continuing to feed her small pieces. "Easy does it. Your stomach's not used to real nutrition." Helene watched through tears she didn't remember starting to cry as the food she'd called poverty paste and poor people's protein brought her daughter back from the edge of death. Each small bite seemed to restore a little more life to Lotte's frail body. The child's breathing deepened, her eyes focused. She looked at her mother with confusion and fear, but she was alive. She was conscious. She was here. "Mama?" Lotte's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Liebling. I'm here." Helene pulled her daughter close, feeling the two prominent bones, the frightening thinness that spoke of months of inadequate nutrition. How had she not seen how thin Lotte had become? How had her pride blinded her to her own child's deterioration? Bennett finished feeding Lotte the entire sandwich, then produced a small carton of milk from her kit. "Slow sips," she instructed, helping the child drink. "We need to get you to the infirmary for proper monitoring, but the immediate crisis is past." As two guards brought a stretcher to transport Lotte, Helene became aware of the audience around them. 40 German women prisoners had witnessed the entire scene. They'd seen Lotte collapse. They'd seen the peanut butter sandwich save her life. And they'd seen Helene, their leader, their voice of resistance against American food, accept the very thing she'd been telling them to reject. The implications would spread through the camp like wildfire. But right now, watching Lotte's chest rise and fall with steady breaths, watching color bloom in cheeks that had been gray moments before, Helene couldn't bring herself to care about politics or pride or what the other women would think. Her daughter was alive. The food she'd mocked had saved her. And now Helene had to face what that meant. Bennett stood, gathering her supplies. "She'll need to stay in the infirmary overnight for observation. You can stay with her, Mrs. Weber." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "She's going to be okay, but we need to talk about what happens next." Helene nodded mutely, following as the guards carried Lotte toward the medical building. Behind her, she could hear the urgent whispers of the other German women beginning their gossip, their judgments, their recalculations of social hierarchies. But ahead of her was her daughter, alive because of the food Helene's arrogance had almost denied her. The walk to the infirmary took less than 3 minutes, but it felt like crossing a vast distance between the person Helene had been, proud, certain, convinced of her cultural superiority, and the person she was becoming, someone who'd learned the hardest lesson a mother could face, that love means being willing to be wrong, to admit error, to abandon pride when survival demands it. As color slowly returned to Lotte's cheeks and her breathing steadied, Lieutenant Bennett pulled Helene aside with an expression that mixed relief with something harder to read, maybe disappointment, maybe determination. "Mrs. Weber," she said quietly in careful German, "your daughter will recover, but I need you to understand something. This didn't have to happen. For 3 months, we've offered supplemental nutrition. For 3 months, you've refused it and convinced other mothers to do the same. Lotte survived today because I happened to have that sandwich ready and because I got to her in time. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about the other children whose mothers are still following your example, still refusing food because they think it's beneath them?" Bennett's words hit like physical blows. Helene wasn't just responsible for nearly killing her own child. She was responsible for putting every other German child in camp at risk. And now she had to choose: maintain her pride and potentially watch more children suffer, or admit she'd been catastrophically wrong and face the consequences of that admission. The resistance had started 3 months earlier, on Helene's second day at Camp Como. She'd been sitting in the mess hall, still reeling from the disorientation of capture and transportation, when Sergeant Ruth Coleman placed a tray before her containing scrambled eggs, toast, and something that looked like brown paste in a small bowl. "Peanut butter, ma'am," Coleman had said in careful German. "Good protein. Most of the ladies like it on their toast." Helene had stared at the substance with professional skepticism. She'd taught home economics for 12 years at gymnasium in Hamburg, instructing young German girls in proper nutrition and traditional cooking methods. She knew quality food when she saw it. This thick, oily paste made from ground legumes was not quality food. "This is what Americans eat?" she'd asked another prisoner, Frieda Kaufmann, a former nurse from Berlin. "Apparently," Frieda had replied with barely concealed disgust. "They spread it on bread like it's butter. They give it to children. The sergeant says it's nutritious." Helene had examined the peanut butter more closely. The texture reminded her of industrial adhesive. The smell was cloying, too sweet, vaguely nutty but artificial. Everything about it screamed cheapness, mass production, food designed for people who didn't know better. "In Germany, we feed peanuts to circus elephants," Helene had announced loudly enough for nearby prisoners to hear. not to educated people. The comment had drawn laughs, nods of agreement. In those early days of captivity, when everything felt uncertain and frightening, finding something to unite against gave the German women a sense of control. Rejecting peanut butter became their first collective act of resistance. Helene had naturally emerged as the leader of this movement. Her professional credentials gave her authority. Her articulate explanations of why peanut butter was inferior to proper European foods resonated with women desperate to maintain dignity in defeat. She'd organized discussions in the barracks about real nutrition versus American substitutes, about the superiority of German dietary traditions, about maintaining standards even in captivity. "We cannot control that we are prisoners," she'd told the assembled women one evening, "but we can control whether we abandon our values. Eating this poverty paste sends a message that we accept American cultural superiority. We must refuse." Most of the older women had agreed enthusiastically. They'd grown up in an era when German culture was taught as the pinnacle of civilization. The idea that Americans might understand food better than Germans was intolerable. But Helene had noticed something troubling. The younger prisoners' women in their early 20s who'd grown up during the war's chaos rather than peacetime prosperity weren't following her lead as faithfully. She'd caught Ingrid Schneider, a 22-year-old former radio operator, sneaking peanut butter on toast when she thought no one was watching. "You should be ashamed," Helene had said, confronting her. "Your generation needs to learn discipline." Ingrid had looked defiant. "My generation is hungry, Frau Weber. We've been hungry for years. This tastes good and makes me feel full. Why should I refuse it?" "Because it's about principles, about maintaining who we are." "Who we are is defeated and imprisoned," Ingrid had replied quietly. "Maybe that means some things need to change." The conversation had disturbed Helene more than she'd admitted, but she'd doubled down, giving speeches about cultural identity and self-respect. She'd organized the women to return their peanut butter portions untouched, making their rejection visible to the American staff. Then, Lotte had arrived 6 weeks ago, transported from a displaced persons camp in France where Helene's mother-in-law had been caring for her. The reunion had been bittersweet joyful to see her daughter again, devastating to see how thin she'd become. The old woman had done her best, but resources in the DP camps were scarce. Sergeant Coleman had immediately offered Lotte extra rations, including peanut butter. "Growing children need protein, Mrs. Weber. She's severely underweight." Helene had refused on principle. She couldn't tell other mothers to reject American food while feeding it to her own child. That would be hypocrisy. Besides, Lotte was eating the regular meals: bread, vegetables, occasional meat. Surely that was sufficient, except it hadn't been. Over 6 weeks, Lotte hadn't gained weight. She'd grown more listless, more pale, moving through days like a ghost. Other women had commented. Frida had pulled Helene aside with medical concern. "The child needs more calories, more protein. She's not recovering." "She's adjusting," Helene had insisted. "It takes time." But now, sitting beside Lotte's infirmary bed, watching her daughter sleep after nearly dying, Helene understood with crushing clarity that adjustment wasn't the issue. Starvation was. She'd been so focused on maintaining principles that she'd failed to see her child literally wasting away before her eyes. Lieutenant Bennett entered the infirmary, carrying a clipboard and a tray. On it sat several peanut butter sandwiches, a glass of milk, and a banana. "She'll need to eat small amounts frequently," Bennett said. "Her stomach has shrunk. We'll start with this when she wakes, then continue every 2 hours through the night." Helene stared at the sandwiches. Simple, humble, life-saving. "I did this to her," she whispered. "Yes," Bennett replied without softening the truth. "You did. But now you can choose differently." When Lotte woke an hour later, Bennett was ready with half a sandwich cut into small squares. The child's eyes focused slowly, confusion giving way to recognition as she saw her mother sitting beside the bed. "Mama, what happened?" "You fainted, Liebling. You're in the medical building now. Everything is fine." Helene stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the disturbing prominence of her skull beneath the thin strands. Bennett approached with the tray. "Lotte, you need to eat something. Can you sit up for me?" The child struggled to rise, and Helene helped her, shocked by how little she weighed. When had this happened? When had her daughter become this fragile collection of bones barely held together by translucent skin? Bennett offered a small square of sandwich. Lotte took it hesitantly, chewing slowly. Her face registered surprise at the taste, not displeasure, but something like cautious pleasure, as if she'd forgotten food could be enjoyable rather than just necessary. "It's sweet," Lotte said quietly. "That's the jelly," Bennett explained. "Grape jelly. The peanut butter underneath gives you protein to help you get stronger." Lotte ate 3 more pieces before her small stomach signaled fullness. Bennett made notes on her clipboard, then gestured for Helene to follow her to the far corner of the infirmary, out of the child's hearing. "Mrs. Weber, I need to be direct with you." Bennett's voice was low but firm. "Your daughter is exhibiting signs of protein-energy malnutrition. In medical terms, she's in the early stages of marasmus, the body consuming its own muscle tissue because it's not receiving adequate nutrition. Another few weeks and the damage could have been irreversible. Brain development, organ function, immune system, all compromised permanently." Helene felt the words like physical blows, but she was eating. I made sure she ate her meals. Sure. Bread and vegetables aren't enough for a growing child, especially one who was already malnourished when she arrived. Children need complete proteins, adequate calories, essential fats. Peanut butter provides all of those things in concentrated form. 2 tablespoons contain as much protein as an ounce of meat, healthy fats for brain development, and enough calories to support growth. "I didn't know," Helene whispered, though even as she said it, she recognized the lie. She had known. She'd taught nutrition for 12 years. She'd simply chosen ideology over science. Bennett studied her with an expression that mixed frustration with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Weber, you've been organizing the other German mothers to refuse peanut butter and other supplemental foods for 3 months. I have 7 other children in this camp showing similar signs of malnutrition." 7. Their mothers follow your example because you have authority with them. You were a teacher. They trust your judgment about what's proper and what's not. The implication settled over Helene like a suffocating blanket. It wasn't just Lotte she'd endangered. How many other children were suffering because their mothers were following her lead? How many women were denying their sons and daughters adequate nutrition because Helene Weber had convinced them it was the culturally superior choice? "What have I done?" The question came out barely audible. "You've let pride become more important than children's welfare," Bennett said bluntly. "But here's what matters now, what you do next. Those other mothers are watching. They saw Lotte collapse. They saw peanut butter save her. Right now they're in the barracks arguing about what it means. Some will say you've betrayed German principles. Others will start questioning whether those principles are worth maintaining when children are at stake." Helene looked back at Lotte, who was drowsing again, a bit more color in her cheeks than she'd had in weeks. "You want me to tell them they were wrong, that I was wrong. I want you to tell them the truth. That cultural pride is a luxury you can't afford when your children are starving. That American food isn't inferior, it's just different. That accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Bennett paused. "But more than that, I want you to understand why this happened. It's not just about peanut butter. It's about the propaganda you've been fed for years, that German culture is superior, that other nations are primitive, that accepting anything from outsiders is contamination rather than cooperation." The words struck at something fundamental in Helene's understanding of herself and her world. She'd been raised in a Germany that taught its citizens they were exceptional, that their methods and traditions were the pinnacle of human achievement. Even after defeat, even in captivity, she'd clung to that belief because it was all she had left. "My husband Klaus," Helene said slowly, "believed in that superiority completely. He joined the party early, said Germany would show the world proper civilization. I received word 2 months ago that he died in the retreat from France. For what? So his daughter could starve in a prison camp because her mother was too proud to accept food from the victors?" Bennett's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Weber. But yes, this is what ideology costs. It cost your husband his life. It nearly cost your daughter hers. And it will cost more if you don't help me change how these women think about food and survival." Helene understood what Bennett was offering. redemption through action, a chance to undo some of the harm she'd caused by using her influence to save children rather than endanger them. But it would mean public humiliation, admitting catastrophic error to women who'd looked up to her, accepting that the enemy understood child welfare better than she did. "What do you need me to do?" Bennett pulled 2 chairs together near Lotte's bed, sitting down and gesturing for Helene to do the same. "First, I need you to understand the bigger picture. This isn't just about Camp Como." She pulled a folder from her clipboard containing what appeared to be official documents and personal letters. These arrived today through Red Cross channels, letters from Germany describing conditions in the occupied zones. She handed several to Helene. "Read them." The first letter was from Frieda Kaufmann's sister in Berlin. Helene recognized Frieda's name at the top. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Frieda, the boys are so thin I can count every rib. We stand in bread lines for 4 hours to receive 200 grams of bread mixed with sawdust. No milk, no eggs, no meat for 6 weeks. Hans and Peter cry from hunger every night. They ask me when Mama is coming home with food. What do I tell them? You write that you're throwing away peanut butter because it's beneath your standards. Frieda, we would kill for such food. We would give anything." Helene's hands trembled as she read. She looked at Bennett. "Does Frieda know about this letter?" "She received it this morning. She's in the barracks right now, I believe, reconsidering every choice she's made since arriving here." The next letter was from another prisoner's family in Hamburg, then another from Munich. Each told the same story: desperate hunger, children suffering, families disintegrating under the weight of starvation, while their captured relatives in American camps refused food out of principle. "My God," Helene whispered, "while we've been throwing away food." "While you've been throwing away food," Bennett corrected, "your countrymen have been starving. The cruel irony is that prisoners of war in American camps are eating better than civilians in most of Europe right now. But you've been so focused on maintaining cultural superiority that you've refused to see the actual privilege of your situation." The words stung because they were true. Helene thought about the meals she'd rejected, the supplemental rations she'd turned down, the peanut butter she'd scraped off toast and thrown away while lecturing other women about standards and dignity. Meanwhile, in Germany, her sister-in-law was watching her nephews waste away from malnutrition. "Captain Hayes is planning a nutrition education session tomorrow," Bennett continued. "All the German mothers will be required to attend. I'm going to explain protein requirements for children, demonstrate proper supplemental feeding, and discuss how to recognize malnutrition symptoms. But Mrs. Weber, those women won't listen to me. I'm the enemy. My science, my medicine, my explanations. They'll dismiss all of it as propaganda because I'm American." "But they'll listen to me," Helene said quietly, understanding the position she was being placed in. "They might. If you're willing to stand up and tell them the truth about what happened to Lotte. If you're willing to admit you were wrong, not just about peanut butter, but about the attitude that made you reject it. If you're willing to face their judgment and anger and still advocate for their children's health." Bennett paused. "I can't force you to do this, but 7 children are at risk, Mrs. Weber, 7 that I know about, and more will arrive as family reunifications continue." Helene looked at Lotte, sleeping peacefully now, her breathing steady. Then she thought about Frieda's twin boys in Berlin, starving while their mother had access to food. She thought about all the German women in the barracks, many of whom had followed her lead because she'd been so confident, so articulate in her contempt for American offerings. "I'll do it," Helene said, "but I need to speak with Frieda first. If she received that letter, she's probably—" "Destroying herself with guilt," Bennett finished. "Yes, I checked on her an hour ago. She's in bad shape. Maybe you can help each other." That evening, after Lotte had eaten another small meal and fallen back asleep, Helene walked to the barracks. The Texas sunset painted the sky in violent oranges and reds, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. She found Frieda sitting on her bunk, the letter clutched in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. "You heard about Lotte," Helene said quietly, sitting beside her. Frieda nodded. "Ingrid told everyone. She said the peanut butter saved her life." She looked at Helene with red-rimmed eyes. "And I've been throwing it away. While Hans and Peter starve, I've been throwing it away because you convinced me it was beneath us." The accusation was fair, and Helene didn't deflect it. I convinced myself first, then I convinced all of you, and I nearly killed my daughter in the process. My sister writes that the boys have stopped playing. They just sit and stare because they don't have energy to move. And I'm here, surrounded by food, refusing it because of pride. Frida's voice broke. What kind of mother am I? The same kind I am, Helene replied. The kind who thought ideology mattered more than survival. But Frida, tomorrow there's a meeting. Captain Hayes is organizing nutrition education. Bennett wants me to speak, to tell the other mothers what happened to Lotte, to convince them to accept supplemental foods for their children. Will you do it? Yes, but I need you with me. Those women need to hear from both of us, a teacher and a nurse. They need to see that we were wrong, that our professional training should have prevented this, that pride is no excuse for neglecting our children. Frida was quiet for a long moment, looking at the letter from her sister. Finally, she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. I'll stand with you. But Helene, they're going to hate us for this. The hardliners, the ones who still believe in German superiority, they'll see this as betrayal. Let them, Helene said firmly. I almost watched my daughter die today. I don't care anymore what the hardliners think. The mess hall the next morning was packed with every German woman in camp. Captain Hayes stood at the front with Lieutenant Bennett, a table beside them laden with jars of peanut butter, bread, milk, and various other foods. The atmosphere was tense, expectant. Everyone knew what this meeting was about. Helene sat in the front row with Frida, both women aware of the hostile stares from some of the other prisoners. Ingrid Schneider caught Helene's eye and offered a small, supportive nod. But others, particularly the older women who'd been most vocal in supporting Helene's resistance, looked at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to betrayal. Captain Hayes began in serviceable German. Ladies, yesterday a child nearly died in this camp from malnutrition. This was preventable. This should never have happened. Today we're going to discuss why it happened and how we ensure it never happens again. She gestured to Bennett, who stepped forward with a medical chart showing child nutrition requirements. Children need significantly more protein per body weight than adults. They need complete proteins containing all essential amino acids. They need adequate calories to support growth. When these requirements aren't met, the body begins consuming its own tissue. Muscles deteriorate. Organs are compromised. Brain development is impaired. The women listened with varying degrees of attention. Some leaned forward, genuinely interested. Others sat with crossed arms, defensive postures suggesting they'd already decided this was enemy propaganda. Bennett continued, explaining how peanut butter provided complete protein, how 2 tablespoons could supply a child's daily requirement, how the fats supported neural development. She demonstrated proper portion sizes, discussed frequency of feeding, showed photographs of malnourished children and healthy children side by side. But Helene could see the resistance in many faces. Bennett's credentials, her medical expertise, her careful explanations, none of it mattered because she was American, the enemy. Whatever she said would be filtered through suspicion and nationalist pride. Captain Hayes seemed to recognize this too. Mrs. Weber, she said, turning to Helene, would you like to share what happened to your daughter yesterday? Helene stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room lock onto her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to speak clearly. 3 months ago, when I arrived at Camp Como, I was offered peanut butter. I rejected it. I called it poverty food, American paste, something beneath German standards. I organized resistance against it. I convinced many of you to refuse it as well, telling you that accepting it meant accepting cultural inferiority. She paused, making herself meet the eyes of women she'd led astray. Yesterday, my daughter Lotte collapsed from severe malnutrition. She was minutes from death when Lieutenant Bennett fed her a peanut butter sandwich. That sandwich saved her life. The food I'd been calling disgusting and inferior was the only thing standing between my child and the grave. The room had gone completely silent. I taught home economics for 12 years, Helene continued, her voice strengthening. I know nutrition. I know what children need to grow and thrive, but I chose ideology over science. I chose pride over my daughter's health, and I convinced others to make the same choice. She pulled the letter from Frida's sister out of her pocket. This letter arrived yesterday from Berlin. It describes two little boys, 5-year-old twins, who are starving. They cry from hunger every night. They have no energy to play. Their mother is here, in this room, and for 3 months she's been throwing away peanut butter because I told her it was beneath her. Frida stood, tears streaming down her face. Those boys are my sons, Hans and Peter. And I've been refusing food while they starve because I listened to ideology instead of maternal instinct. As a trained nurse, I knew better, but I let cultural pride override medical knowledge. The impact was visible. Several women were crying now. Others looked stricken, guilt dawning as they recognized their own letters from home, describing hungry children, desperate families, starvation rations. "How many of you have received similar letters?" Helene asked. "How many of you know that your families in Germany are hungry while you're surrounded by abundance here?" Hands slowly rose throughout the room, more than half the women. "Then we have a choice to make," Helene said firmly. "We can continue refusing American food out of principle, maintaining our cultural superiority while our children suffer. Or we can admit we were wrong. We can accept that the nation that defeated us militarily is also the nation feeding us better than our own government ever did. We can choose survival over ideology." An older woman in the back stood up, her voice sharp. "You're asking us to betray everything we believe in, to accept that they're better than us." "I'm asking you to keep children alive," Helene shot back. "If that's betrayal, then I'm a traitor. But I'd rather be a living traitor than a dead patriot, and I'd rather have my daughter healthy and eating American food than malnourished and maintaining useless principles." Bennett stepped forward with several jars of peanut butter. "We're not asking you to abandon German culture. We're asking you to recognize that different cultures have different strengths. Americans excel at mass production, at creating nutritious food that's cheap and accessible. That's not inferior. It's practical genius. You can maintain your traditional recipes and also appreciate what we do well." Frida spoke up, her voice steadier now. "In my medical training, we learned that good doctors take the best practices from everywhere. German precision, French surgery techniques, British sanitation methods. Only fools insist their own country has all the answers. I've been a fool. I'm choosing to stop." Slowly, tentatively, some women began nodding. Ingrid stood. "I've been eating peanut butter secretly for weeks. It's good. It makes me feel strong. I was tired of pretending otherwise." Another young woman rose. "My daughter is 6. She's thin. I've been refusing supplemental rations because Mrs. Weber said it was proper, but I don't want to be proper anymore. I want my daughter healthy." The tide was turning. Not everyone. Some women still sat with closed expressions, unwilling to bend, but enough. The critical mass was shifting. Captain Hayes seized the moment. "Starting today, supplemental nutrition will be provided for all children under 12. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches twice daily, plus milk. Mothers who participate in nutrition education classes will receive additional rations to share with their children. This is not optional for the children's welfare, but we're asking for your cooperation rather than forcing it." Bennett began distributing jars of peanut butter and instructional sheets in German. "I'm also starting a cooking class. I'll teach you how Americans use peanut butter in various recipes. You can teach me traditional German preparations. We learn from each other." Helene remained standing as women began filing past the table, some eagerly taking the jars, others reluctantly. A few gave her poisonous looks as they passed, seeing her as a collaborator. But more stopped to thank her quietly for speaking the truth, for giving them permission to prioritize their children over ideology. 4 months later, Helene stood in the camp's nutrition classroom, watching recently arrived German mothers examine jars of peanut butter with familiar skepticism. Their expressions mirrored what she'd once felt, disgust mixed with cultural superiority. Lotte sat nearby, healthy now, cheeks full and pink, munching her afternoon peanut butter sandwich while drawing pictures. She'd become living proof of transformation. "My name is Helene Weber," she began in German. 4 months ago, I refused peanut butter, calling it poverty food. Then my daughter collapsed from malnutrition. An American nurse saved her life with a peanut butter sandwich." The new arrivals looked shocked. Helene recognized every defensive expression because she'd worn them herself. The door opened, and Frida entered with a mother and 2 desperately thin boys, fresh from displacement camps. This is Anna Schneider and her sons, Martin and Joseph." Helene knelt to the boy's level, her heart aching. "Are you hungry?" The younger boy nodded silently. His mother looked proud, defensive. Lieutenant Bennett prepared sandwiches while Helene spoke gently. "I know what you're thinking, that accepting this means surrender. I thought the same. Then my daughter nearly died while I stood on principle." Anna watched her sons eat with desperate intensity, color returning to their cheeks. "They've been so weak. They'll recover with proper nutrition," Helene assured her. "But you must let go of the idea that accepting help is weakness." That evening, Captain Hayes brought documents. "Your sister-in-law and nephews have been approved for family reunification, 3 weeks." Helene's hands trembled. Her family, the boys who'd been eating grass soup, would soon be here where food was abundant. She looked at Lotte, now bilingual and thriving, representing everything about choosing survival over ideology. The peanut butter she'd mocked had become her most powerful teaching tool, not because it was superior, but because it represented the courage to admit error and accept help from former enemies. "Lieutenant Bennett," Helene said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on us." Bennett smiled. "Thank you for being brave enough to change your mind. That's harder than maintaining pride and far more important. In a world broken by ideology, sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply admitting you were wrong and feeding your children."